So here's a wild story for you. A guy scams America out of hundreds of millions of dollars, serves less than 2 years in prison, and then becomes a global celebrity by selling the story of his own crimes. This is the story of Jordan Belfort, the man who basically proved you could build an empire on lies, watch the whole thing burn to the ground, and then build a second, even more famous one right on top of the ashes. So you have to ask, right? How did he pull that off? How does a convicted felon, a guy responsible for ruining thousands of lives, manage to spin his criminal past into this celebrated multi-million-dollar second act? Well, that's the big question we're going to unpack right here.
Okay, let's start with the sheer scale of the crime. The court ordered Jordan Belfort to pay back $110 million to the victims he defrauded. I mean, just think about that number. A staggering sum meant to try and fix the damage he caused.
But then, there's this number. 22 months. Despite a fraud that big, Belfort served just 22 months in a minimum security prison. So how do you get from a 9-figure crime to a sentence that's shorter than some rock band's world tour? To really get that, we have to go all the way back to the beginning. It all started back in Queens, New York, in the 1960s. This is where a young Jordan Belfort figured out he had this, almost superhuman talent for selling absolutely anything to anyone. I mean, his ambition was just off the charts from the get-go. As a teenager, he pulls in 20 grand one summer just slinging Italian ices from a cooler. He gets into dental school but then walks out on the very first day. After that, he starts this door-to-door meat business. It's a huge hit for a minute, and then it just completely implodes. But every single step, especially the failures, taught him something really important.
And this is the moment that really set him on his path. The dean of his dental school straight up told the new students that dentistry wasn't the place to get rich. For Belfort, that's all he needed to hear. He literally stood up and walked out. His goal was singular, and he wasn't sorry about it. He wanted wealth.
So when his meat business went belly up, Belfort had this huge realization. The problem wasn't the spoiled steaks or the bad logistics. His real talent, his superpower, had nothing to do with what he was selling. It was pure persuasion. He just needed to find a product with a much, much bigger payday.
And he found that payday on Wall Street. Not, the prestigious, big-name part, but in the gritty, unregulated back alleys of the market. This was the Wild West of penny stocks, and it was the perfect playground for his very particular set of skills. Now, you got to understand, penny stocks were basically considered garbage by any legitimate firm. They're incredibly risky, there's often no real company value behind them. But for brokers, they had this one magical quality, a 50% commission. Think about that. For every dollar a client put in, the broker kept 50 cents. The incentive wasn't to make the client rich, it was just to make the sale, period.
And here's how he weaponized it. His firm, Stratton Oakmont, would secretly buy up a ton of some worthless penny stock. Then his army of salesmen would hit the phones, creating this insane frenzy with false promises and high-pressure tactics. That's the pump. Once the price shot up to its peak, Stratton would sell every single one of its shares. That's the dump, making an absolute fortune while the stock came crashing down, leaving all their clients with nothing. This line from one of their actual sales pitches, it just perfectly captures the voice of the whole scam. See? They didn't sell company facts. They sold the fear of missing out. It was a masterclass in psychological manipulation, designed to totally bypass logic and hit people right in their greed and insecurity.
And he built an army to do it. He didn't hire a bunch of guys with MBAs. He hired hungry, ambitious kids from the neighborhood. He taught them his straight-line sales method, this system designed to control a conversation from the second you say hello to a closed deal, no interruptions. And their targets? They weren't the super rich. They were working-class people, teachers, mechanics, small business owners, people who felt ignored by the real Wall Street and were sold a dream that was actually a total nightmare.
The amount of money that poured in from this was just obscene. And it fueled a culture that was like part frat house, part cult, and 100% pure fantasy. The fraud wasn't just a business model. It became the engine for a lifestyle of just total, uncut hedonism. And the speed of it all was just dizzying. Stratton Oakmont went from a little boiler room in a strip mall to a major Wall Street player in just a few years, taking companies public and moving hundreds of millions of dollars. But it was all growing way too fast, way too loud, and way too recklessly. Belfort pretty much became a cult leader in an Armani suit. He had the private helicopter, the mansions, the giant yacht. The office parties were legendary for just how depraved they were. The top salesmen got showered with cash and Rolexes, while the ones who didn't perform were publicly humiliated. The entire system was built on two things: fear and absolute loyalty to Jordan.
But here's the thing about an empire built on lies. It's inherently unstable. The same recklessness that fueled the parties and the massive profits started to attract attention from people who weren't buying the dream. The fantasy was about to slam head-on into reality.
So, the SEC started noticing a pattern of really suspicious activity. Journalists began asking some tough questions. And crucially, former employees, guys who got burned by Belfort or just got caught in their own schemes, they started talking. An FBI agent named Gregory Coleman began quietly connecting the dots, tracking the money and building his case.
And his personal decline was just as dramatic. In 1996, totally high on drugs and his own ego, Belfort ignored his captain's warnings and sailed his massive yacht, the Naomi, straight into a Mediterranean storm. The yacht sank. He and his family had to be rescued by the Italian Navy. I mean, it's a perfect metaphor for his entire life. A guy so convinced he was untouchable that he steered directly into a disaster of his own making.
And back in New York, the final act was playing out. In October of 1996, federal agents swarmed the offices of Stratton Oakmont. They seized documents, hard drives, everything. The music stopped, the phones went silent, the party was officially over.
So, facing up to 30 years in prison, you'd think that's it. But Jordan Belfort did what he had always done when he was backed into a corner. He started selling. Only this time, the product wasn't a worthless stock. It was a news story starring himself as the charismatic anti-hero. He cooperated with the FBI, he wore a wire on his former friends and colleagues, and that cooperation is what got him that ridiculously light 22-month sentence. Then, in prison, he wrote his memoir. It became a bestseller and then a blockbuster movie. The criminal became an icon. The man convicted of fraud was now a motivational speaker, a sales coach, and a podcaster, teaching ethics and success.
But while Belfort was busy building his new brand, let's not forget about his victims. They were left with the wreckage. They lost their retirement funds, their life savings, some even lost their homes. And of that $110 million in restitution he was ordered to pay, only a tiny fraction of it has ever actually been paid back to the people whose lives he completely ruined.
You know, Belfort once said, "I was guilty of being greedy, but so is everybody else." And maybe that's the most unsettling part of this whole story. He sold us his crimes as entertainment, and we bought it. Which leaves us with one last question to chew on. Does his claim that we're all a little greedy actually excuse what he did? Or does it just explain why we find it so hard to look away?